And President Trump made some shocking remarks yesterday at a police training center in Nassau County, New York, saying, after we defeat Iran, the Strait of Hormuz will belong to the United States, basically annexing the Strait of Hormuz. Why did he say that? What exactly is the reason? Also, the United States just released data showing that over the past 90 years, the country has become the safest it's ever been. So what exactly happened there? Also, New York Mayor Mandani announced a rent freeze, but as a result, New York rents hit record highs again. I just want to say one thing, and that is, I told you so. Fang Wei predicted this for everyone, so today let's look back at it again. Alright, today is still, even though it's the weekend, there's still a lot of news. Welcome to Good Morning America with Fang Wei. Hello to our YouTube audience and to our listeners on Sound of Hope, Silicon Valley, FM 99.1. Alright, let's get straight to the point. First, let's talk about this. Yesterday, President Trump went to a police training and intelligence center in Nassau County, New York, to give a speech. This center is on Long Island, New York, on the easternmost side of New York. During his speech, President Trump said, after we finish defeating Iran, we will declare the Strait of Hormuz as U.S. territory. He said, that's essentially it. Unless we allow it, no vessel will be able to pass through the strait. President Trump also said that he's using the military more than he previously thought, but he said applying pressure on Iran is necessary to prevent the so-called Islamic regime from obtaining nuclear weapons. Also, President Trump said regarding gas prices, you only need to pay a little bit more for gas. This is to ensure that a very evil country cannot possess nuclear weapons. He said, for this, I will never apologize. Of course, the most important part of what he said was that first sentence, saying that after we defeat Iran, we will declare the Strait of Hormuz as U.S. territory, which, again, caused quite a stir. Iran's deputy foreign minister, Darib Abadi, posted on social media saying the Strait of Hormuz belonged to Iran in the past, belongs to Iran now, and will always belong to Iran in the future. This waterway will only be opened or closed under Iran's orders. So there's a question here. Why did Trump say that? What do you think? Why did Trump say that? Because saying something like that is indeed quite shocking, right? So what's the purpose of saying such things? Let me share my view. Because Trump is currently in a state of truce in the Middle East. Not a withdrawal, but a truce. And in this state of truce, I think Trump doesn't want to show weakness, so he says things like this. So the other side of what he's saying is that he really does want a truce. It's the same thing in reverse. Like I said before, a barking, but I'm not saying, well, in America, comparing people to dogs isn't an insult, but in China it is. There's a saying in America, barking dogs don't bite and biting dogs don't bark. That's the idea. So Trump really wants to call a truce before the midterm elections, but at the same time, he doesn't want to show weakness. But at the same time, is Trump really weak? Of course not. I think after the midterms, Trump wants to solve this problem once and for all. Right now, with the election coming up, gas prices are where they are, and there are other factors, like U.S. ammunition stockpiles are currently dropping, so these issues need to be addressed. Of course, after the midterms, it'll be a completely different situation. But meanwhile, before the midterms, Iran will definitely take the chance to cause trouble. So before the midterms, there really are a lot of variables in the Middle East, I think. Yeah, I think. As for the midterms themselves, for the Democrats, the socialist wing, the DSA, is a factor causing internal chaos for them. And for the Republicans, the war in Iran and related oil prices are disruptive factors. But anyway, the midterms, in my view, are essentially a showdown between a traditional America and a mutated America. Will America hold on to tradition, or will it be, to use a nice word, progressive, or as I say, a mutated America? Is America going to change? Who do people support? This is truly a crossroads for America, yet another crossroads. In November 2024, I'd say it's not a crossroads, it's the edge of a cliff. If the election goes the other way, we fall off that cliff. We're on the cliff now, but still choosing a path at a crossroads. One path still leads to the cliff, but it's less dangerous, though still very, very critical. That's my take. I'd love to hear your thoughts, too. What do you think about the midterms? Meanwhile, the commander of U.S. Central Command, Admiral Cooper, is actively pushing to resume airstrikes on Iran along with Israel. He said combat against Iran must resume, and preparations must be made to attack Iran's infrastructure, including gas, oil, and power facilities. So, he said, And Israel's Channel 13 reported that Cooper told senior Israeli defense officials, "We will likely have no choice but to resume combat, and we'll need you for joint strikes." So this is communication between military units being disclosed through the media. Israel stated that the Trump administration also requested last week to shut down all plans for fronts against Iran, which are now suspended. So on one hand, they talk about a ceasefire, but on the other, they're fully preparing. So I think before the midterms, Trump won't take the initiative to start a war. But if Iran goes too far, the U.S. will still strike back. That's the current situation in the Middle East. Okay, next I'll tell you about Colombia in Central and South America. The U.S. homicide rate. Let's talk about how the U.S. homicide rate has dropped to a 70-year low. The FBI's latest crime statistics have been released. Last year, the violent crime rate across the entire United States dropped by 9.3% compared to the previous year. 9.3% in just 1 year. This is in 90 years. What does 90 years mean? This is the largest single-year drop since the FBI began estimating this data after its founding in 1936. Additionally, cases of homicide and what's called non-negligent manslaughter have dropped significantly by 18.1%. The murder rate has fallen down to just 4.1 cases per 100,000 people. What kind of situation is this? This is on par with 1955 and 1956, meaning it's dropped to a 70-year low. Or you could say that regarding homicides, the United States has now returned to that safest level of the 1950s. Can you imagine? In 2026, social safety in America will return to the 1950s, a time after World War II when America was truly prosperous and everything was peaceful. So President Trump, while speaking at the Nassau County Police Academy, linked the drop in violent crime to the Trump administration's policies, emphasizing support for law enforcement and the results of deploying the National Guard in places like Washington. President Trump said, "We ended the war on police," referring to the radical Democrats who often talk about defunding the police. Trump said, "We are going to fully fund the police." President Trump said, "We have also strongly declared war on crime." In addition to violent crime, property crime and hate crime also fell last year, with property crime overall dropping by 12.4%. Usually a 2.4% drop in a year is good, but this was 12.4%. Among those, auto thefts dropped by 23%, reaching their lowest level in over 20 years. There's data showing that in 2022 and 23, vehicle crime in the U.S. surged, with a challenge trend even going viral on social media, where people competed to show how to steal Kias and Hyundais using their design flaws. Stealing cars had become a public spectacle. And now it has dropped by 23%. Robberies fell by 18.5%, rapes by 7.6%, and what's called felony assault or aggravated assault fell by 7.2%. So where does this data come from? FBI data says this comes from crime data submitted by over 17,000 U.S. state, county, city, tribal, and university law enforcement agencies, covering over 96% of the population. So it's basically an accurate and comprehensive national data source. The FBI also took the rare step of releasing crime trends for the first half of 2023. And this data says from January to June this year, violent crime in the U.S. fell another 11% compared to last year, which is beyond belief. Among those, murder and non-negligent manslaughter fell by 23%, robberies by 20%, rapes by 19%, and aggravated assault by 7.2%. So this year is set to surpass last year and become another record. In other words, the United States is quickly turning things around. If you ask me from my take, it's about this feeling, you know? Do y'all feel it? For our friends living in different places, you can tell us, do you feel your community is safer? Of course, it's understandable if you don't feel it after just 1 year. But if you do feel it, write it down. Do you think America has gone from dangerous to safer? Or if you don't think so, or if it's the same, that's fine too. And please, when you write, add the name of your city, okay? Right, yeah, the city name, so we know where you're coming from. Now, besides the FBI's national statistics, there's another think tank, a Washington think tank called the Council on Criminal Justice, CCJ. They also do their own independent city tracking, and it shows a similar trend. This organization tracks 30 U.S. cities. They can't track 17,000. They're not a government agency. But their data says in the first half of 2024, this first half, homicides dropped 18% compared to the same period last year. Okay, we just looked at it. What was the percentage drop in the federal data again? 23%. They said an 18% drop, which is 215 fewer cases. If the trend continues, homicides for the whole year could drop to a new low in over a century. Isn't it, for Chinese Americans, isn't it a bit beyond belief? I mean, after a change in government, homicides and crime rates just plummet like this? So whatever comments or thoughts you have, feel free to leave a message, okay? Or if you feel differently, you can leave a comment, provide some evidence, write a bit more about why you see it that way. All right, the next news item is actually good news for America too, called the Great Anti-Drug War Alliance. So the U.S. and several countries are cracking down on drug production sites in the Western Hemisphere. Drugs are, of course, a root cause or a contributing factor to crime in America, because when people use drugs, first of all, they act out, and secondly, they'll do anything to make drug money. So what is the latest news on this? After saying goodbye to the leftist government, Colombia's new right-wing president, named Asprilla, his nickname is the Tiger, quickly adjusted the way they cooperate with the U.S. after taking office. Not only did he join the U.S.-led anti-drug alliance as the 19th member, at the same time, he further authorized the U.S. Department of War to participate in the fight against narco-terrorism within Colombia, authorizing the U.S. military to conduct joint military operations in Colombia to destroy terrorist groups and their networks. What's the big deal about this news? There is one, because, inviting the U.S. military into your own country for drug enforcement, most governments are unwilling to do that. Besides the need for drug enforcement, there's a very important factor. It's a matter of faith, a matter of sovereignty. So only truly, because if you do this, first of all, it's like sacrificing your own sovereignty to not sacrifice, but on the surface, you're letting foreign troops in. This is an insult to sovereignty. And secondly, it's an insult to your own administration. It's like saying I'm not capable enough, so I have to bring in the U.S. military, right? Only those who truly serve their country and whose teams or themselves aren't bought by drug lords would do this. And that is exactly what the new president of Colombia has done. So this is going to represent a very significant change. We must realize that Colombia is the most important birthplace, the origin, for cocaine and these drugs. Meanwhile, the other major source of fentanyl we know today isn't actually there. It originates in communist China. Then it's shipped to Mexico for processing. Now, the Mexican president has always been reluctant to let the U.S. military enter Mexico, and he likely still is. But there's a new development. The Mexican president just made an official announcement, agreeing to deploy armed forces with the U.S. to crush drug cartels at the border. Both sides recently held joint security drills at the El Paso border. They deployed helicopters and special forces rappelling down, with military and police vehicles patrolling heavily along the Rio Grande, the border river. The Mexican National Guard and Army also coordinated in sync. The drills specifically targeted the Juarez cartel drug network, which was designated as a foreign terrorist organization by the United States just last month. U.S. and Mexican officials stated clearly during the drills that drug cartels are terrorists, and those who assist them are no longer just criminals, but supporters of terrorism. And anyone involved in, joining, or providing material support to these terrorist organizations will face severe consequences. So what does this mean? I'll just add one comment. You can't fight City Hall. Even if the Mexican president doesn't want to cooperate with Trump, he has no choice but to comply, because his economy is so dependent on the U.S. Just like Canada, you simply can't go head-to-head with the U.S. or you'll lose big. So the Mexican president hasn't really misjudged things in this regard. That's why Canada is now increasingly becoming the focus of the news. In 4 days, on August 19th, the U.S.-Canada negotiations hit their deadline. If no deal is reached by then, the U.S. will slap a 50% tariff on Canadian goods, which would be earth-shattering for Canadians. So this is a very important piece of news. But looking at the U.S. and Mexico, the Mexican president is also from the Democratic faction, but he didn't clash with Trump. So he's basically maintained a cooperative stance. Anyway, looking ahead, with cooperation from Colombia and Mexico, Central and South America's role as the world's drug hub, not just for the U.S., might slowly vanish. That's definitely a good thing. Next, let's discuss two very American topics for your information. U.S. gun rights advocates have just secured a major victory. What kind of victory? It's now legal to freely buy and sell silent pistols, or silent firearms, or rather, firearm silencers. In English, they're called silencers. Now, this landmark event happened just after midnight yesterday, Thursday. Two gun owners bought two silencers from a firearms dealer in Texas without any prior federal registration. That was the process. Normally, before this, if you did that before Thursday, you'd face 10 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. It would go that far. So, what's this all about? This is a very American topic, but I think it's also very telling, and people all over the world can learn from it. We all know the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution is about the right to bear arms. Simply put, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That's the phrase. Now, this right to bear arms is a major controversy in the United States. Back in the 1930s, the United States had prohibition, which triggered gang violence. Much of it was from brewing, bootlegging, transporting, and selling illegal alcohol for profit. Back then, the drug was, well, alcohol. So, as a result, turf wars broke out. Gang violence back then, like the Chicago mob using the Thompson submachine gun, the Tommy gun, in direct shootouts, killing countless people at once. It created a series of bloody crimes that shocked the nation, sparking intense fear among the American public of machine guns and ruthless bandits. We've all seen that, what was it, that movie with Al Pacino about Chicago? I kind of forgot the name. Anyway, it shows how they really used submachine guns and machine guns to fight. So public opinion at the time shifted toward wanting the federal government to step in and regulate firearms. But then there's the Constitution, right? The Second Amendment clearly states that the federal government has no constitutional right to directly ban the people's right to own firearms. So what to do? Congress at the time reached a compromise and used a method, taxation instead of prohibition. Because prohibition is unconstitutional, you can never get it done. But you can tax them, right? So the National Firearms Act of 1934 passed three regulations. First, it didn't ban these machine guns and submachine guns, but instead imposed a $200 excise tax on their manufacture and transfer. You might say, what's the big deal about a $200 tax? You have to remember that was $200 in 1934, which is equal to several $1,000s today. In other words, if you buy a submachine gun today for $500 or $600, and then you have to spend another $4,000 for a permit, a license, or an excise tax, you'd just forget it and not buy it, right? So for the average person back then, it was an astronomical price. It was basically a way to discourage people from buying them. Silencers were also included because of fears that assassins and criminals would use them for silent killings, making them even more dangerous. Another requirement was that these weapons, including silencers, had to be registered with the federal government at the time of purchase. Otherwise, violators faced 10 years in prison. Okay, well, fast forward to today. It's been 90 years now, right? That $200 fee was written into law long ago and hasn't changed. It's basically nothing now. Adding $200 to a gun purchase isn't expensive anymore, so it's lost its deterrent effect and is just a registration fee, something American gun rights groups have always fiercely opposed. There are a few specific reasons. First, the higher level reason comes from the Constitution. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be, shall not be infringed, right? So if I have a firearm with even more firepower, it can be opposed, it can be banned. That just doesn't make sense. That's the first point. Second, from a practical standpoint, the main focus of the opposition right now is on silencers, suppressed pistols and suppressed firearms. Now, firearm silencers are very popular among gun owners in the real world because for hunters or when they're shooting, it can protect their hearing. Otherwise, it's just too intense every time. And second, when dealing with an intruder, an invading criminal, someone breaking into your home, if you use a suppressed pistol, you can take down the criminal without alerting the others, if there are multiple intruders, right? For the homeowner, it's a powerful weapon. And there's another point that people don't talk about, but is definitely there, in case of government tyranny in the United States. As you know, the Second Amendment isn't just for protecting hunters, or at least not primarily. And it's not primarily for protecting against petty thieves. It's to allow the people to fight back against government tyranny. So if government tyranny were to occur in the future, having suppressed firearms or suppressed pistols would be the best legal means for the people to defend themselves. Because of all these reasons, they've always insisted that firearm silencers cannot be banned. But the opposing view is that if you do this, you won't hear a sound when a criminal is killing people, and they could just keep on killing, right? Those are the differing opinions. So the Gun Owners of America, the GOA, ended up taking the federal government to court over this, and the lawsuit went on for years. Then we come to 2025 and Trump takes office. After Trump took office, he wanted to roll back the restrictions in the National Firearms Act on silencers and short-barreled firearms. Short-barreled meaning the gun's barrel is shorter. These firearms have a lot of firepower, so he wanted to lift those restrictions. As a result, this happened in 3 steps. Step 1 was President Trump doing some groundwork, telling Republicans in both houses of Congress, you guys need to agree. Let's not regulate firearms. Let's not regulate silencers. We need to uphold Second Amendment rights. You can't say the people's right to carry firearms cannot be banned, is inviolable, but the right to carry even more powerful firearms can be infringed. That just doesn't hold up, right? That's the first point. Second, last year, President Trump signed something called the Big and Beautiful Act, right? And he tucked something into it. Since the Big and Beautiful Act only needed 51 votes to pass, the threshold was much lower. So the $200 tax in the National Firearms Act for making silencers was reduced to $0. So it applies to silencers, short-barrel rifles, short-barrel shotguns, and other related weapons. As a result, after this passed, the NRA immediately seized on this change. On the very first day President Trump signed the law, the NRA sued the federal government again. Now, what does that mean? It means that originally there was this $200 tax. So the point is, it was on this basis that people were required to register. Now, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act has reduced the tax to 0, which effectively removes the legal basis for the National Firearms Act. Since you're not collecting a single cent, why are you registering it, right? What power of Congress can still be used to justify this registration? So the registration should be abolished. Then, just a few days ago, on August 5th, a judge in the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Texas ruled in this case that silencers are legal. Yes, what the National Firearms Act said back then was wrong. So the ruling was that the federal government lost. After losing, there was another step. Trump's Department of Justice said, we want an appeal. No appeal, so it becomes the final supreme ruling. So this is how it turned out today. Firearms are legal in the U.S., but overly powerful ones were not, or silenced pistols and rifles were not. So the controversy surrounding this is now settled, and they are all legal. So regarding the double-edged nature of these more powerful firearms, I wonder what your view is. Do you agree with the Gun Owners of America's perspective? Or do you agree with the opposing side? I'll let everyone express their views, okay? It's a very controversial issue in the U.S. and in countries all over the world. They actually face the same problem. Of course, not in China. China and Taiwan probably don't have this, right? But in many countries, it exists. Let me share my perspective. It's the same. Guns are tools. Guns are just tools. In America, if there are many good people, don't restrict them, then this tool will serve a good purpose because it can be used to defend against bad people or even against tyranny. I'll say it again. Some say America has no tyranny, so the people don't need guns. Is it that people owning guns prevents tyranny, or is it that because there's no tyranny, people don't need guns? So we need to get the causality straight. Secondly, if there are many bad people in America, then truly not everyone can own a gun because it would lead to chaos everywhere. Now, if you ask, how do you define good and bad people? Who defines it? You define it. I think good and bad are defined by morality. Those who follow morality are good, those who don't are bad. Then you might ask me, who defines morality? Morality is defined by religious scriptures. In the West, it's the Ten Commandments. Don't underestimate them. They regulate the very foundation of Western morality. In the East, it comes from the Tao Te Ching, Confucianism, and Buddhism. These are all beliefs and teachings on how to be a good person. So, religion and faith define human morality. So looking at it the other way, in my view, I believe a society with faith is a moral one. A moral society has more good people. And in a society with many good people, the citizens should own guns to protect themselves and prevent a tyrannical government. But if that's not the case, then it's really hard to say. Then whether guns do more good than harm or more harm than good is truly very difficult to determine. Okay, well, let's leave that topic there for now. Next, let's talk about a very American topic. I'll keep it brief, but I think it's worth hearing about, which is a recent new law in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has an abortion law, a law related to abortion, which stipulates that after 24 weeks of pregnancy, an abortion is not allowed. As it turns out, Massachusetts just passed a new law that abolished this. It's not a brand new law, but an amendment, where as long as a doctor agrees, you can even have an abortion right before birth, provided a doctor signs off on it. So this has triggered a huge backlash from conservatives and also caused a rift within the Democratic Party, specifically within the state's Democratic Party. This law is called the Roe Act, and it passed in the state legislature on July 22nd by a vote of 119 to 33. The voting was basically split along party lines. In this state, it was signed into law by the Democratic governor. 9 Democratic state representatives voted with the Republicans against the legislation. So if you flip it, if those 9 votes had gone the other way, it would have been 128 to 24. So to what extent is the Democratic Party powerful in Massachusetts? It's a super majority. Anyway, it wasn't just Republicans. Several Democratic lawmakers also expressed disagreement with this view, pointing out that the bill doesn't align with the opinions of most Massachusetts voters on abortion. One of those Democrats, a state representative named Tolman, said this new law represents an extreme and dangerous position. To be clear, it allows for unrestricted abortion at any time, and in many cases, right up until the moment of birth, funded by taxpayers, meaning the government. Tolman also said the bill was rushed through the legislative process in 2 weeks without giving the public a chance to voice their opinions. As you know, this is a common phenomenon. In many places with a Democratic supermajority, many bills are pushed through so fast that the public doesn't even know before they've passed, because they have more than enough votes to completely control the entire legislative process.